Welcome to Citizens Climate Radio, your climate change podcast. I'm Peterson Toscano. Each month, we take you behind the scenes of climate policy. We break down what's happening in Washington and beyond. And we share real steps you can take to make a difference. Today, we're going to do something new. CCL's Elissa Tennant teams up with our policy wizard, Dana Nuccitelli. They'll unpack what's going on with the IRA. No, not the Irish Republican Army. No, you'll find out what the IRA is, but you probably know already if you're listening to this podcast. Why the IRA matters and how you can help. Elissa and Dana, welcome to today's show.
Hello. Good to be here.
Hi, Peterson.
What is your title, Dana?
I am CCL's research manager.
AKA policy wizard. Since you're going to be on the show a lot the next few months, I thought it'd be great for you to tell the listeners a bit about yourselves and what you do for CCL. But before that, I have an icebreaker for you. If you could title your very own climate bill, what would it be and why?
I will go first, Dana, if that's cool. I'm already going. So if I could title a climate bill, I would call it the Future Generations Security Act. I was browsing LinkedIn on Earth Day, as one does, and I saw this quote: "The Earth is not something we inherit from our ancestors, it's something we borrow from our children." That hit, and I think that the Future Generations Security Act would have broad appeal and kind of speak to that need to protect the Earth for our children. Not that I have any.
Great. I love that.
Wow, you put a lot of thought into that answer. Well done. We've got the Inflation Reduction Act, and I always felt it should be called the Climate Change Reduction Act, so I'm going to go with that simple answer.
Oh, good. I like that. And could you tell the listener just a little bit about yourselves, whatever you want to share about your own lives and what you do at CCL?
Yeah, so I am the content marketing manager at CCL. I work on CCL's marketing team. And every video or social media post, I make content, so I make cool stuff. So I like to call myself a metaphorical air traffic controller, kind of deciding what gets made based on our messaging, what kind of bills are running through Congress, and what we want to say to the people.
And I'm an environmental scientist and a climate journalist. As the research manager, I keep up with the latest climate science research and policy and do a lot of education of our volunteers. And I make social media videos when Elissa forces me to.
Which is all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Well, great. I'm excited that you're going to be here. I'm going to take a back seat on this one and just sort of let you go for it. And I'll listen and learn as I really need to do. So thank you, Elissa and Dana, for taking over the show today. Listener, I leave you in capable hands.
Thank you, Peterson, for having us. So before we dive into the show, I just want to mention that Dana and I will be live and in person at CCL's summer conference this July in Washington, D.C., which is a great opportunity to lobby your members of Congress on the Hill, but also have a full jam-packed day of action preparing you to meet with your members of Congress. So if you want to join us there, please visit cclusa.org/conference. But now, let's talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the aforementioned IRA, and the clean energy tax credits that come with it. I'm Elissa Tennant. Welcome to Citizens Climate Radio. Today, I am joined by Dana Nuccitelli, CCL's research manager, recently got a promotion, shout out. We are digging into the Inflation Reduction Act, what it is, how it works, and why the clean energy tax credits in this historic act are suddenly under threat. So if you're hearing phrases like tax credits and budget reconciliation and feeling your eyes glaze over, please do not worry. We are in this together. We've got you. And Dana and I are going to walk you through it. So let's start with the big picture, Dana. What is the Inflation Reduction Act? When did it pass? And why is it such a big deal for climate?
Yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act was by far the biggest climate bill that the United States has ever passed. We passed it in August of 2022. And it's a big deal for the climate because it has lots of investments in clean energy that will result in a big reduction in climate pollution over the next decade or so, assuming it stays in place.
And as a throwback kind of to your climate bill of fantasy, So you said you would have called it the Climate Reduction Act, Climate Change Reduction Act. Why wasn't it called that? Why didn't they take that brilliant idea and run with it? Why is it the Inflation Reduction Act?
It was a nice bit of marketing because everybody was very, very worried about inflation at the time and still is. And so they call it the Inflation Reduction Act to make sure that it would be very popular. And to be fair, like in the long term, it should reduce the risks of inflation because fossil fuels tend to be a big contributor to inflation very often because their prices are very volatile. The price of oil can go up and down quite a bit. And so if we can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels like oil over the long term, that will reduce future risks of inflation. So it's kind of a long-term Inflation Reduction Risk Act. But just calling it the Inflation Reduction Act was just a nice bit of marketing, I think.
I am biased, but I'm a really big fan of nice marketing. So I will allow Inflation Reduction Act to stand. Fine. So one of the IRA, so Inflation Reduction Act, parentheses, IRA, to keep it short and sweet. So one of the IRA's most powerful tools is this concept of clean energy tax credits. So can you break down kind of why we are here to talk today? What actually are these clean energy tax credits?
Yeah, the bill had a whole bunch of different clean energy tax credits. And so a couple categories. There are investment and production tax credits for clean electricity and manufacturing. So you can think about an example of a solar panel. So if you are investing in a facility to manufacture solar panels, there's a tax credit for that. And then if you have a facility that's manufacturing solar panels, you get a tax credit for the solar panels that you're manufacturing. And then those solar panels can go into building a solar generation facility, a solar farm. And so if you're investing in building a solar farm, you can get a tax credit for that. Or if you are producing solar energy from an existing solar farm, then you can get tax credit for that. So that's one big category. There's also tax credits for things like carbon capture and storage and hydrogen and nuclear power and things like that. And then there are also a category of tax credits for consumers. So some examples of that are electric vehicles. There's a tax credit for new and used and commercial electric vehicles, and also for leasing an electric vehicle. There's tax credits for making your home more energy efficient or electrifying it with technologies like heat pumps, which are an awesome technology. For putting solar panels on your roof and a battery system on your roof if you're a homeowner, or you can do it as a business owner too. So those are kind of the main, there's a bunch more tax credits, but those are kind of some of the main ones.
Wait, let's talk more about the tax credits for the run-of-the-mill people. So I'm not at heat pump levels of income yet, but I am at maybe like home energy audit levels. Like, does it still cover that?
Yes, there is a tax credit for a home energy audit. And so like if you get an expert to come in and look at your house and figure out what the most efficient things you can do to improve your home energy efficiency is, there is a 30% tax credit for that. So like if you spend $450 on that, you can get a $150 tax credit. And then they'll tell you like, you should improve your windows or your insulation or your doors, and you can get tax credits when you make those improvements as well.
Fantastic. But we're kind of focusing on the business side of tax credits today, right? I just want to know about the individual side for like my personal own gain and use.
They're both important.
All right. So these clean energy tax credits for individuals and businesses and everybody who can benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act, they are under threat. So let's talk about that. Let's kind of take a little turn here and go down the not as fun part. Not as fun as talking about home energy audits.
Yeah, it's a little more wonky. So back in 2017, the last time Republicans had full control of Congress, they passed a bunch of tax cuts. And those tax cuts are starting to expire. They last for a little bit under a decade, and so they're nearing expiration now. And so now that they're back in charge, they want to extend those tax cuts. And doing so is going to cost a lot of money, something north of $4.5 trillion over the next decade, depending on exactly what they decide to do. And a lot of people are also worried about the size of our national debt, which is getting close to like $37 trillion now. And so if you add another $4.5 trillion to it, that's like more than a 10% increase in our already very large national debt. And so they would prefer not to just do the spending without paying for it. And so looking for pay-fors, as we call them. And so, the Inflation Reduction Act is one place to get some money to pay for those tax cut extensions. because we invested something like $1 trillion over the coming decade in the Inflation Reduction Act, largely in those tax credits. And so that's kind of why they're on the chopping block with a big target on their back, is to use as one of the pay-fors to extend those expiring tax cuts.
Do you ever watch the Schoolhouse Rock where the national debt is an animated Tyrannosaurus Rex that wanders through the nation's capital and eats things?
I don't think I saw that. I saw the one like, here's how a bill becomes a law, but I don't think I saw the T-Rex.
This is a deep cut, okay? Only the real ones know about the Tyrannosaurus debt.
The debt was born in 1790 when our new government took over $75 million the colonies spent in the Revolutionary War.
We've got to feed the monster so it doesn't get upset. It's got an awesome appetite. Tyrannosaurus debt.
But whenever we talk about the national debt, that's all I think about is this like Schoolhouse Rock animated T-Rex. That being said, so we need to pay to extend the tax credits. I'm repeating it back to you. This is an active listening technique to make sure I understand. We need to pay for the extension of tax credits.
Tax cuts.
To do that, tax cuts.
Yes.
We need to pay for the extension of tax cuts. And in order to do that, we need to find ways to cut our spending as a federal government.
Right.
So there are a lot of other things on the chopping block, but we at Citizens Climate Lobby are focused on the IRA and the clean energy tax credits.
That's right. You got it.
We are a climate org. Okay, that makes sense to me. We can move on. So let's talk about budget reconciliation. This is something that has come up quite a bit kind of in recent years. I don't think it was a really big topic a decade or so ago. So it sounds like something from a government finance class, and I fear it a little bit. So what does it mean in practice, and why is it such a big deal for climate budget reconciliation? How does it fit into all this?
Yeah, so the issue here is that the Senate has the 60-vote filibuster that makes it hard for the Senate to do very much because 40% of the Senate can just kind of block progress on a particular piece of legislation if they so desire. And Congress has decided that getting a budget done each year is a really important thing to do. And so they carved out an exemption from the Senate filibuster for budgetary negotiations, and that's what budget reconciliation is. The Senate can do it once or twice per year. And basically, they have to, anything that goes into a budget reconciliation package has to be specifically focused on the budget. And so they can't, for example, change some regulations that don't have any budgetary cost and stick that into budget reconciliation because that's not allowed. So anything like tax cut extensions, tax credit additions, or repeals, those can all get put into a budget reconciliation package that then only needs 50 votes to pass in the Senate along with a majority in the House.
I have many questions. And the first one is a question I've wanted to ask for so long, but I'm too scared because it's been too long. Why is it called a filibuster? That sounds more like a candy bar.
I have no idea why it's called a filibuster.
Oh, okay, that makes me feel better. At least you also don't know.
Filibuster.
Anybody listening, if you know why it's called a filibuster, please write in because our research manager doesn't know. We've stumped him on this one.
I failed.
Right.
Sorry.
Moving on. So the budget reconciliation process does not require the filibuster candy bar as part of it. So how did they decide what is budgetary and what isn't budgetary? Like, how is it decided what is allowed in budget reconciliation and what isn't? Like, if you tried to do something that was stepping over the line.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it just has to have some kind of component that generates revenue for the government or that costs the government some money. That's kind of the focus of it. And then they can ask the Senate parliamentarian whether it is budgetary in nature, and the Senate parliamentarian will make a ruling and say, yes, you can include it in the budget reconciliation, or no, you can't. And the parliamentarian's kind of like the cop of Congress, and and the Senate actually listens to the parliamentarian and does what the parliamentarian says.
Who's the parliamentarian? I feel like we should all know who this person is.
I forget what her name is, but she's been the parliamentarian for quite a while. She's like the Senate rules expert.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So this simple process that lets Congress pass a budget with just a simple majority, budget reconciliation, where are we in this process right now? Like, what is the timeline? And again, how do those IRA clean energy tax credits fit into all of this? You need to lay the land.
Yeah. So each relevant committee in the Senate and the House is kind of given a broad outline of here's how much money you can spend and or here's how much money you have to cut. And then they work on the details of how they're going to meet that broad outline. And so that's kind of what they're doing one at a time. They're coming up with their committee's specifics on how they're going to meet that broad budget that they're given. And then once those are all released into the wild, then all the members of the House and the members of the Senate look at those and decide if they can vote on it or say, I can't vote for something that's got this provision, so I need to change it. And then they have negotiations. And ultimately, they come up with the one big package that supposedly can get a majority of votes in the House and in the Senate. And then the House and the Senate will each kind of release their package, and they have to agree to a reconciled version between the two so that one package can get a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate, because the House and the Senate might have different priorities and disagree.
It's a reconciled package, budget
It is.
reconciliation. Okay. I was about to ask where the reconciliation term came from too, so you were way ahead of me there. So they come out with two versions of it. We at CCL, I know you're giving me the lay of the land, but we at CCL always refer to budget reconciliation as largely a partisan process. I feel like now's a good time to dive into why it is largely a partisan process and why we call it that.
It wasn't always a partisan process. In the past, when there was more bipartisan negotiations that tend to be more successful, when there was less partisanship in Congress, then like the budget reconciliation process was just to make sure that they could get something passed with a majority of votes, but it didn't necessarily have to be all Republicans or all Democrats. So just 50 votes in the Senate. But then over time, Congress became more partisan, more divided. And so it became a partisan process such that whichever party was in the majority in the Senate, they could get what they needed to get done in the Senate. So that's why it's become a partisan process, but it wasn't always one, and it doesn't have to be one. It is right now.
And there is a large, vast future ahead of us. But for this exact moment, that's why it's largely a Republican process, as they hold a majority in the House and the Senate. Okay, back to the lay of the land. So where are we in the budget reconciliation process?
Yeah, so each committee is in the process of releasing their plans for how they're going to meet their broad budgetary rules. And then in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, in the House, it's the Ways and Means Committee is in charge of those. In the Senate, it's the Senate Finance Committee is in charge of the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits and other important finance tax credits and provisions. So we are going to see what they have planned, and then we'll try to hope they preserve some stuff from the Inflation Reduction Act, and we will try to convince them to preserve that important stuff.
Side note, I think Ways and Means is an excellent committee name. I think it's just vague enough where I have no idea what they actually do, but they seem very prestigious and important. I think in terms of marketing, they really nailed that.
They have the ways, they have the means, they do whatever.
The things and stuff committee. I feel like mysterious and important.
Yes, that's what they should call it, mysterious and important committee.
The work is mysterious and important. Shout out Severance. So what's your favorite IRA tax credit? If you had to pick one, you have to pick one, actually. It's not an if.
That's a good question. I think I have to say that the clean electricity tax credits, because they're so important and they're going to do so many things, like help us deploy a lot more clean electricity, a lot more power in general as our power demand is increasing, reduce home electricity bills, they create a lot of construction jobs, and they're the most important provision for reducing climate pollution. According to modeling, they're going to be responsible for about half of the Inflation Reduction Act's climate pollution reductions. So for all those reasons, because they're so important, clean electricity, I have to say, would be my favorite. Although if I were being more biased and selfish, I would say the home weatherization tax credits are my favorite, because I recently upgraded my 70-year-old windows on my house just last year, and I was able this year to take the tax credit for that and reduce my the amount of taxes that I owed. So I really appreciate that tax credit for selfish reasons too.
That's how I feel about the induction stove tax credit. When I got my induction stove last year, just because our old electric stove, this house is 105 years old. So when our stove finally gave out, I got the induction stove and I invited people over to watch me boil water. I was like, do you want to come over and have like a spaghetti party? It's like, it's so fast. You'll love it. So I agree. That was a big one. I thought you were going to say, I don't even know why I know about these, but the USDA REAP credits, the agriculture, because you're a big silvo pasture fan.
Well, the REEF program's not a tax credit. It's more of like a grant program. And so
Of
that's a good
course.
program. And I do love silvopasture, planting trees on pasture land, but not technically a tax credit, yes.
Well, we'll save that one for our silvopasture episode
Yeah.
incoming.
Ooh, I like that. That's a good idea.
We've established these tax credits are important. The Inflation Reduction Act is important. We really need to leave it intact throughout the budget reconciliation process. So let's talk about why this really matters. Like, what would we lose if these tax credits go away? What's at stake?
There is a lot at stake. We would lose a big chunk of climate pollution cuts. We would lose, I hate that a lot. We would lose a whole bunch of domestic manufacturing facilities and jobs, local revenue that goes to communities where those facilities are located. Our electricity bills would go up because we would get less of this cheap, clean electricity. So there's all kinds of bad stuff that would happen that I don't think anybody wants to see those bad things happen. And so we're going to try very hard to convince our members of Congress to keep these important tax credits in place.
Yeah, can we get like a vibe check on Aisle America? How are people feeling about the tax credits in general? Do we have like a general public opinion on the Inflation Reduction Act clean energy tax credits?
Yes, there was just recently a survey released by the University of Maryland that asked specifically about a bunch of these tax credits. And they found that all of them that they asked about were very popular across the political spectrum. So actually the least popular one that they asked about was the tax credit for new electric vehicles, which is a $7,500 tax credit if you qualify and you're purchasing a new electric car. Even that one, even among Republican voters who they surveyed, it was a 71% support and 29% wanted to repeal it. So even like the least popular tax credit among Republican voters specifically was still like 2.5 to 1 support to oppose. And so they are all very, very popular because they do so much good stuff. And who doesn't like to get a tax credit?
I can't imagine people wouldn't want to get a tax credit for
I know.
their clean energy purchases. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So these are important. We want to keep them intact. What can listeners do right now to help protect these tax credits?
Well, we at CCL have been doing stuff to help protect them since like last December. We have had our volunteers whose members of Congress are on the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee contact those representatives and tell them about the importance of the tax credits. We've had lots of actions where our members have contacted their members of Congress, especially Republican members of Congress, asking them to support and preserve the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. We had a conservative conference where our conservative volunteers went to Washington, D.C. and had a nice conference and training and then lobbied almost 50 Republican members of Congress about the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits and a few other things. So we've been doing a lot. And of course, we have our summer conference, as you mentioned, between July 20th and 22nd, where we will again, most likely, assuming that this question hasn't been settled yet, which it probably won't have been, we will be lobbying on the Inflation Reduction Act there too. We've also got a database that I put together of all the different facilities and projects that the Inflation Reduction Act has helped incentivize all across the country and like the number of jobs it's created and the local revenue. That we're using that information to inform our lobbying. And so we're doing a whole lot. And so one thing people can do is to join their local Citizens Climate Lobby chapter to help us with these lobbying efforts, or just to contact their member of Congress directly and do this kind of lobbying and tell their stories and convince our members of Congress to keep these important tax credits in place.
Dana, you just named so many things. So I'm going to give it one thing.
Okay, one thing's good.
That was so many things.
What's the one
really
thing?
Stressed. So the one thing I would say is if you are represented by a Republican member of Congress, you can write their office right now asking them to protect the Inflation Reduction Act's clean energy tax credits. And we have a tool that makes it super easy at cclusa.org/IRA defense. So it's cclusa.org/IRA defense. And then a lot of people will say, well, I'm not represented by a Republican, but I still want to help. And you totally can. You can share that link on your social media accounts and send it directly to your friends and family who are represented by Republican members of Congress, and spread the word, because budget reconciliation is a really long process. Like you said, this question probably will not be answered by the time our conference rolls around in July. So we need to keep the conversation going, because the more we keep it going, the more important these tax credits are to the general public. So bring it up at parties, talk about it on your next open mic night, take out a billboard, or just share this episode with anybody you think might be interested in learning more about the Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits. And once again, please join us this July 20th through 22nd in Washington, D.C. at Citizens Climate Lobby Summer Conference. You can learn more and sign up at cclusa.org/conference. It's the perfect opportunity to get up to speed on climate policy, build community, and meet directly with lawmakers to defend these tax credits and more. And you don't have to be a policy expert because I clearly am not. I am just just someone who cares. So again, learn more and register at cclusa.org/conference. And I have one last question for you, Dana. What gives you hope that we can keep these programs alive? Why are we still going at this?
The good news is that a lot of Republican members of Congress have already expressed that they want to preserve at least some of these important tax credits. There's been a number of letters from groups of Republicans to their leadership saying, hey, let's be careful about what we're getting rid of here, because there's a lot of great benefits, especially in Republican districts, in terms of like battery manufacturing and, as you mentioned, EV manufacturing facilities and big solar and wind farms, and those things generate a lot of local jobs and local revenue, and they're helping local communities. And it doesn't look good if you vote to repeal a policy that is generating a lot of local jobs and manufacturing and tax revenue in your district. And so it's in their benefits to preserve a lot of these tax credits. And so I'm hopeful that we will be successful in preserving at least some of the more important provisions from the Inflation Reduction Act.
Hear, hear. Peterson, myself, and hopefully the listener agree with you. So thank you, Dana. The next episode, I think, might be the Foreign Pollution Fee Act, which was just introduced in Congress a short time ago. And we're going to be doing a training on that for our volunteers coming up. So I think we have a lot to talk about on that topic, unless we decide to skip it and just go straight to silvopasture. Who knows?
Both good topics.
And thank you for listening. We'll give it back to Peterson to close things out.
Thanks, Elissa.
Thanks, Dana.
Elissa, Dana, I need to thank you for that amazing overview. I understand this so much more clearly than I did before. I mean, I thought I knew about the Inflation Reduction Act, but I really lost the thread at some point, but you brought it all back for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I learned so much. So thank you very much.
Thank Dana, but I am happy to help facilitate a conversation about the Inflation Reduction Act at any party.
I have one request. Whenever you talk about having created a database, can I call it a Dana-base?
Hey.
The Dana-base. That's a good name. I like it.
Well, yeah, come back and talk more because we need to know about this policy. And I have to say, it's one of the areas I'm weakest in. And as people who do climate work, it's easy to lean into the places where we have strength because it's comfortable. But we all have to learn new tricks and adapt all the time to climate change and to climate policy. So thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to much more.
Thank you, Peterson.
We're all going to learn and grow together.
Yay. And thank you for listening to Citizens Climate Radio. If you're ready to take action to protect clean energy tax credits, visit cclusa.org/IRA defense. That's cclusa.org/IRA defense. And don't forget, you can join us in person. And when I say join us, I mean like Elissa, Dana, and I are going to be at Citizens Climate Lobby's Summer Conference. It's happening from July 20th to the 22nd in Washington, D.C. Learn more and sign up at cclusa.org/conference. In fact, I think you should just type in cclusa.org/whatever you like and see if it comes up as an actual page on the website.
Hey.
Do you have a story or a question you'd like to share? Call or text our listener line, which is 619-512-9646. That's 619-512-9646. You'll find show notes and links to our hosts. All of us are hosts today, it feels like, at cclusa.org/radio. See how it works? And be sure to follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and yes, TikTok. Just search for Citizens Climate Radio. This episode was written by Elissa Tennant, Dana Nuccitelli, Leslie Beatty, Elise Silvestri, and me, Peter Toscano. Production by Elise Silvestri and me. Music comes from Epidemic Sound. Citizens Climate Radio is a project of Citizens Climate Education. I will see you next time, but in the meantime, stay strong, determined, and creative in your work on climate change.